As gevolg van die oponthoud met vragskepe by die Durban-hawe, het die Kaapstad-hawe hulle is oopgestel vir vragskepe. Nou, op hierdie stadium is dit nogal ekonomies vir 'n klomp mense en vir 'n klomp afdelings van die ekonomie, 'n klomp dele van die ekonomie, 'n groot bekommernis. Gaan ons invoerprodukte inkry en gaan ons uitvoerprodukte weer kan oplaai op skepe betyds en vroegtydig, veral die sagte vrugtebedryf voordat dinge vrot raak. Nou, ons is selfs vanmôre met Cayla Murray, sy is 'n lid van die Wes-Kaapse Provinsiale Parlement en ons is selfs oor hierdie groot logistieke uitdaging om Kaapstad oop te stel. Good morning, Cayla.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on air today.
It's lovely having you. Thank you very much for taking the time. Firstly, let's start off with the situation at present. What is the current challenges at Durban-hawe?
Okay, I think that's a good point of departure, and I think the best way to talk about this is in terms of the numbers. So I was in contact with the CEO of the Transnet Ports Authority last night and asked for the most recent container recovery plan update. And essentially, when we're looking at Durban, what we see is, as of yesterday, they had 2 berths planned with a total volume planned of 1,500 that they needed to move. What they actually managed to move was 976. So you can see that there's a significant shortfall of what they're trying to achieve. That was only at the we call it the Durbanal Container Terminal Pier 1, but there are shortfalls all over. And we also see this spilling over into other terminals like the Container Terminal Pier 2, which had a shortfall of about 600, the Durban Point Terminal, which essentially saw about 200 discrepancy in volume. And what's also quite concerning is that, and this is essentially where I became interested in this, was we weren't seeing berths around the 30th of November into Cape Town Port, as well as the Port of Elizabeth. And so my question to Transnet at the time was, if we aren't seeing any movement into those ports, why can there not be any diversion there? Are those ports actually functioning? Do they have staff capacity? Is the infrastructure up and running? Because we know that this backlog is quite severe at Durban. And so there needs to be a mitigation. There needs to be another plan.
You're talking about the problem and how severe it is. How bad is the delay of shipments?
The delay of shipments, I don't have those figures on me at the moment, but from my understanding is that it is causing significant issues in terms of what we're projecting for movement in December. And the other crisis level that we're quite concerned about is what is going to be happening in terms of Cape Town with this impending crisis happening. And if we look at surcharges that are going to be implemented by MASK and MSC. In the context of Cape Town in particular, what we are aware of is that a lot of the pressure that we're anticipating over the December period is going to come from the grape harvest. And so for Cape Town in particular, and I'm sorry, I have to focus on Cape Town because I'm from the Western Cape and I'm the member in the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. So our concern really is really trying to get to the bottom of why is it that Cape Town isn't being used as a diversion, if it can? And also, is Cape Town prepared for what we are going to anticipate with the large volumes of additional fruit from extra harvest that we got this year? What we don't want to see is fruit rotting. What we don't want to see is logistic chains being held up. And we don't want our businesses and our farmers to lose out over this season.
Cayla, at the center of this is one of the questions is logistics and infrastructure. Certain harbors, certain ports are geared towards specializing in certain cargo. Would cargo that flows over from the Durban harbor, will all that matters of cargo be accommodated in Cape Town? Is there a logistics and infrastructure there to accommodate that?
To put it simply, Cape Town can't handle the same capacity as Durban. We know that Durban is the busiest and the largest port in Southern Africa. and it handles the vast majority of the country's shipping needs. So we see it dealing with things including container shipments, bulk cargo, automobiles, and raw materials, whereas Cape Town is better equipped for fresh fruit, but it can also deal with container shipments. And so in that way, it can be used to offset some of the load, provided that its staffing and infrastructure capacity is up to scratch. And that for me is where the question mark really remains, because having received the update last night from the CEO, what we see with Cape Town is the volume handled as of yesterday was 960, but or rather, let me put it like this. What they planned was 960, what they achieved was 808. There's also a question of what are they doing as we go into the December period to ensure that they are sufficiently capacitating truckers? Are the staff going to be able to work night shifts in order to deal with the increased load that we're anticipating? And I also just want to flag, this for me is a huge red flag. The DA in particular has written to the Speaker of the National Assembly, and they've requested that there urgently be a decision with regards to the Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises conducting oversight at Durban and at Richards Bay. But unfortunately, that application for urgent oversight was rejected by Parliament. So for me, there really are a lot of questions, hard questions, that we need to be asking of Transnet Ports Authority and Transnet in general when it comes to capacity, because it doesn't seem at this point that it is clear on what our ports are actually able to handle. Even if Cape Town can handle that backlog of container shipments from the port of Cape Town, we're still not seeing that diversion and that upliftment. One thing that I can add here is that when I spoke to the CEO and I asked about the possibility of using Cape Town as a diversion, at that point we had nil berths. And that continued for several days. But by the 1st to the 5th, we started to see some boats coming in about between 1 and 3 vessels a day, which is still not anywhere near where we can be handling. But it does show that there's been some movement, and I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'm still not satisfied in that regard, because I still don't believe that we are really addressing the capacity issues here.
Cayla, so what's the solution? What would you like to see happen going forward?
I think, let me say what I'm going to do. As the Standing Committee Chair for Finance, Economic Opportunities and Tourism, I'm going to be holding public hearings in the next year with those involved in the supply chain or the value chain when it comes to shipping and when it comes to exports, and compiling a report which I can then submit to the Minister, that being the National Minister of Transport. But what I would really like to see is a move towards privatization, meaningful conversations in this regard. We see that discussions on privatization are happening when it comes to the Port of Durban, and that is likely to yield a lot more efficiencies within the way that the port is run. Because we know right now that under a government-led port, with a lack of competitive characteristics within the port, it creates a lot of backlog. And so I think that is ultimately where we need to be moving. In Cape Town, we have seen positive indications of privatization, with Mars coming on board to partner with the Belcon in Cape Town, which would be very helpful in the movement of containers and the movement of goods that need to be shipped. But we're not there yet. And so on the one hand, what I aim to do is to provide more oversight in the best possible way that I can through public hearings. But we need to be moving towards privatization. We really don't have an option. And the Port of Cape Town's standstill, or the Port of Durban as well, standstill, and Port Elizabeth, really is an indicator that we need to take a very, very different approach when it comes to our ports.
Cayla, thank you very much for joining us this morning. It is one of the most pressing issues at this stage in the economy, apart from all the other things. But this one is something that we need to focus on now, especially for the fruit and agriculture industry in South Africa. Exports cannot be delayed. The industry cannot handle it. Thank you very much for taking time and for fighting the good fight.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
Nou ja, kom ons hoop dinge raak vinnig beter en 'n plan gebeur. Dis dan Cayla Murray, lid van die Wes-Kaapse Provinsiale Parlement.